Welcome to Soundscape Books. You're listening to an exclusive audiobook recording. Like and subscribe for more content. Enjoy.
Milan's Cage. Chapter 1. The Brilliant Cage. The first shard of morning light, thin and precise as a surgeon's scalpel, pierced the vast expanse of glass, tracing a stark line across the polished concrete floor of Antonetta's penthouse. It was 5:45 a.m. The city of Milan, still dreaming beneath the first blush of dawn, lay sprawled below, the Duomo's spires rising like ancient sentinels directly opposite their living room, an omnipresent symbol of history and aspiration. Inside the Duomo penthouse, however, tradition was merely an aesthetic, a backdrop to a life meticulously curated, every surface gleaming, every object a statement of minimalist luxury. Antonetta stirred, the silk sheets a cool caress against her skin. Her body, tall and slender, moved with an innate grace even in slumber. But as her deep-set, intelligent eyes fluttered open, the weariness that often shadowed them seemed to deepen. The ritual began. She slid out of bed, her bare feet silent on the heated stone, and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city was a masterpiece of muted tones, but Antonetta felt no surge of inspiration, only a familiar, quiet ache. She moved through the master suite, a symphony of muted greys and whites, with the automatic precision of a well-oiled machine. The scent of espresso already brewing drifted from the smart kitchen. In the dressing room, a wardrobe of impeccable designer pieces awaited, each garment a testament to her flawless taste and social standing. She chose a tailored ivory pantsuit, the fabric a whisper against her skin, pairing it with a simple silk camisole and sleek high heels. Her dark, glossy hair, a rich obsidian sheen, was expertly swept into a sophisticated chignon, framing a face that, despite its flawless complexion and striking features, held that subtle, almost imperceptible weariness. She applied a light, natural makeup, just enough to enhance, never to conceal. As she regarded her reflection, a flicker of something unreadable passed through her eyes. Bella figura, she thought, the Italian phrase for presenting a good image, had become the defining philosophy of her existence. She was a perfect sculpture, polished and admired yet hollow within. Frank Ricci was already awake, perched on a minimalist stool at the kitchen island, his back to the panoramic view. He was immersed in the luminous glow of his tablet, fingers flying across the screen, his expression intense. Even without looking, Antonetta knew he would be reviewing market reports, international investment portfolios, or the latest schematics for a Sforza Group development. His world was one of numbers, projections, and unyielding ambition. Frank, in his prime, was a formidable presence, sharp, impeccably dressed, and radiating an effortless charm that was as much a part of his corporate arsenal as his shrewd intellect. She poured herself a café lungo, the rich aroma briefly rousing her senses. "Buongiorno, Frank," she said, her voice soft, modulated. He looked up, a quick, practiced smile gracing his lips. His eyes, though momentarily diverted from the screen, still held a residual flicker of calculation. "Antonetta, cara. You're up early. Another big day?" "As always," she replied, the answer automatic. She took a sip of her coffee, the warmth doing little to thaw the chill she often felt around him. Their interactions were always polite, always cordial, devoid of any sharp edges or deep dives. It was a perfectly choreographed dance, each step known, each touch light and fleeting. A kiss, if one could call it that, was usually a brush of lips against her temple as he passed, a gesture of ownership more than affection. "The Milanese Design Expo is coming up," he mused, returning his gaze to the tablet. "I'm considering a new partnership for the Sforza Group, perhaps a sustainable urban planning initiative. Your firm could be involved." Antonetta felt a familiar prickle of irritation. Her career was not merely a convenient appendage to his empire. "My firm is already booked solid for the next 2 years, Frank. "We're leading the redevelopment of the Porta Nuova commercial hub." She said it without inflection, a statement of fact, not an appeal for recognition. He merely nodded, a dismissive gesture, as if her professional life was a detail to be managed, not celebrated. "Of course. Well, we can always discuss synergies later. Tonight, the Rossi Gala. Don't forget, important connections to be made." His words, meant to be collaborative, landed like a gentle command. She was his asset, his beautiful, intelligent, socially valuable wife, integral to the grand edifice of his influence. The golden cage might be crafted from wealth and status, but it was a cage nonetheless. Antonetta turned away, watching the city awaken, a pang of deep, unnameable longing swelling in her chest. She yearned for something raw, something real, a life where her heart, not just her mind, felt truly engaged. But the yearning remained a silent echo in the opulent silence of their penthouse. At the offices of Moretti Architects, nestled in a sleek, glass and steel building overlooking the bustling Corso Vittorio Emanuele II, Antonetta transformed. The quiet weariness receded, replaced by an aura of cool competence. Here, she was a leader, a visionary, her intellect cutting through complex problems with elegant solutions. She sat at the head of a long, minimalist conference table, blueprints spread before her, their intricate lines a language she spoke fluently. Around her, a dozen bright, eager faces looked to her for direction. Today's discussion revolved around a groundbreaking residential tower, a delicate balance of sustainability, luxury, and aesthetic innovation. The cantilevered terrace modules, Antonetta began, her voice clear and authoritative, must achieve a seamless integration with the facade's dynamic sun shading system. We need to explore materials that offer both thermal efficiency and a certain tactile warmth, contrasting with the structural boldness. Perhaps a textured ceramic composite, locally sourced, to ground it in Milanese heritage. She gestured with a graceful hand, highlighting sections on the digital display. Her colleagues scribbled notes, nodded intently. Enrico, her senior associate, a meticulous man with a keen eye for detail, spoke up. "The stress points on the lower modules, particularly those extending over the public plaza, will require innovative anchoring. I've researched a new tensile support system from a German firm. It offers unprecedented flexibility." Antonetta listened, absorbing, synthesizing. "Good, Enrico. Present the full specifications by end of day. But remember, the aesthetic must remain paramount. We are not merely building structures, we are crafting experiences. The residents must feel a connection to the city, to the sky, even within their private spaces." The meeting progressed, a fluid exchange of technical data and artistic vision. Antonetta navigated the complexities with ease, offering incisive critiques and encouraging creative solutions. Her insights were sharp, her judgment unerring. By the time the meeting concluded, a palpable sense of direction had been established. "Antonetta, that was brilliant," exclaimed Marta, a young architect with bright, admiring eyes. "The way you immediately identified the potential for biophilic design in the vertical gardens, it completely elevates the concept." Antonetta offered a polite, almost imperceptible smile. "Thank you, Marta. It's about more than just green walls, it's about integrating nature organically." Outwardly she thrived. Her firm was renowned, her projects celebrated in international design magazines. She was respected, admired, successful by every quantifiable metric. But as she returned to her sleek, glass-walled office, the accolades felt like applause for a performance she no longer truly believed in. The thrill of creation, that visceral spark that once ignited her spirit, had long since faded, replaced by the detached satisfaction of a puzzle meticulously solved. She was going through the motions, executing tasks with flawless efficiency, but the profound sense of purpose, the true passion for her craft, felt like a distant memory. This too was a gilded enclosure, albeit one she had built for herself, a professional sanctuary that offered prestige but little authentic joy. She was the architect of her own bella figura, and the weight of its perfection pressed down on her, leaving her feeling profoundly, exquisitely, empty. The evening found Antonetta and Frank gliding into the opulent grandeur of Palazzo Mirando, an 18th-century edifice transformed into a lavish museum and event space. Tonight, it hosted the annual Rossi Charity Gala, a veritable showcase of Milanese high society. The grand ballroom, with its frescoed ceilings and glittering chandeliers, pulsed with the soft hum of conversation and the clink of crystal glasses. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, old money, and unspoken judgments. Antonetta wore a gown of midnight blue silk, a simple, elegant column that flattered her tall, slender frame. Diamonds, subtle yet exquisite, glittered at her throat and wrists. Frank, immaculate in a bespoke tuxedo, kept a proprietorial hand at the small of her back as they navigated the throng. They moved as one, a polished, powerful unit, a picture of marital bliss and social prominence. Antonetta, Frank, caressez me. A perfectly coiffed woman with a pearl necklace that seemed to weigh her down in status more than in jewels, air-kissed Antonetta's cheeks. Such a stunning couple as always. Your new project, Frank, the Sforza Tower, it's simply extraordinary. Frank's smile widened, genuine in its satisfaction. Thank you, Isabella. Antonetta, of course, advised on some of the key aesthetic elements. He squeezed her arm gently. A public gesture of appreciation that felt, to Antonetta, like a subtle claim of credit. She offered Isabella a serene smile, her mind already drifting to the next polite platitude she would have to utter. The conversations flowed like expensive Prosecco, effervescent, superficial, and ultimately forgettable. They discussed the latest exhibitions at the Triennale, the fluctuations of the euro, the summer season in Portofino, and always, subtly, the perceived successes and failures of their peers. Antonetta felt like an exquisite object on display, admired for her beauty, her intelligence, her husband's status, but never truly seen. Across the room, amidst a cluster of socialites adorned in couture, Antonetta spotted Alessia Visconti. Alessia, with her impossibly high cheekbones and a predatory gleam in her eyes, was a notorious purveyor of gossip, her sharp observations often laced with a barely concealed venom. Her gaze, when it landed on Antonetta, lingered a moment too long, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. It was a look that promised a keen awareness of any deviation from the prescribed norms, a silent warning that every misstep would be noted, dissected, and disseminated. Antonetta felt a familiar prickle of discomfort under Alessia's scrutiny, a confirmation of the suffocating social pressure that permeated this world. Frank, ever the consummate host and networker, introduced Antonetta to a prominent industrialist. My brilliant wife, Antonetta, an architect of considerable renown. She designed the new corporate campus for Generali, you know. His pride was evident, yet it felt less like a celebration of her achievement, and more like an advertisement for his own impeccable taste in choosing a partner. He spoke about her, rarely to her, when others were around. She endured the forced smiles, the endless handshakes, the hollow pronouncements of admiration. Her internal monologue, a restless murmur beneath the composed facade, grew louder. Is this all there is, this gilded treadmill of obligation and expectation? The thought was a raw, unwelcome intrusion into the evening's flawless performance. She was living a life that others envied, a life that was objectively perfect, yet she felt a growing, suffocating despair. The air in the ballroom, thick with perfumes and 1,000 whispered secrets, suddenly felt too heavy, too restrictive. She needed to breathe. Muttering a polite excuse to Frank, who was deep in conversation with a potential investor, Antonetta slipped away. She found a discreet balcony overlooking a quiet cobblestone street, a welcome escape from the ballroom's stifling warmth. The Milanese night air, crisp and cool, kissed her skin, carrying the distant murmur of traffic and the faint chime of church bells. She leaned against the ancient stone balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to clear her head, to quiet the insistent whisper of her discontent. The sudden jolt was unexpected. One moment, she was enveloped in the quiet solitude of the balcony. The next, A body collided with hers. A gasp escaped her lips as she stumbled back, barely catching herself before tumbling over the railing. "Dio mio, I am so sorry." A man's voice, rough-edged and vibrant, cut through the night. Antonetta opened her eyes, startled. Standing before her was a figure so utterly out of place, he seemed a phantom from another reality. He was tall, but not with Frank's polished athletic build. His dark hair was a wild, untamed tangle that fell across a forehead smudged with what looked like charcoal or paint. His clothes, though of decent quality, were disheveled, a linen shirt partially untucked, paint stains marring a pair of faded canvas trousers. In his hand, clutched almost desperately, was a worn leather sketchbook, its pages spilling out like secrets. He looked like an artist, raw and unapologetic, a vibrant splash of disorder in her meticulously ordered world. Their eyes met, and in that instant, everything shifted. His eyes were the color of the deepest sea, intense and luminous, holding a profound depth that seemed to bypass her carefully constructed defenses and look directly into the hidden corners of her soul. There was no polite deference, no calculated charm, just a startling, raw recognition. It was a gaze that saw not the polished socialite in the midnight blue gown, but something much more fundamental, something she herself had almost forgotten existed. A spark, primal and undeniable, arced between them, a silent electricity that made her breath catch in her throat. His apology, uttered moments before, now seemed distant, irrelevant. The world outside them, the gala, Frank, the expectations of her life, all receded. There was only this man, his hand still lightly resting on her arm where he'd steadied her, and the electrifying current that flowed between them. His presence was an almost painful contrast to the sterile perfection of her existence, a vivid, untamed color against her muted palette. He was chaos, freedom, passion, everything she longed for, and everything she had suppressed. "Are you all right?" he asked again, his voice lower this time, a husky rumble that resonated deep within her. He made no move to withdraw his hand, nor did she. Antonetta could only nod, mute, captivated by the intense sincerity in his gaze. She felt unnerved, yes, but also strangely invigorated, as if a long dormant part of her had just been shocked awake. The gilded cage, for a fleeting potent moment, felt like it had cracked open, letting in a draught of wild, exhilarating air. "Antonetta!" Frank's voice, sharp and demanding, cut through the spell, pulling her back with brutal force. He stood at the balcony's edge, his face a mask of polite concern that barely concealed his irritation. "There you are. I've been looking for you. Are you feeling ill?" His eyes flickered to the disheveled stranger, a flicker of suspicion in their depths. The man, Vronsky, she didn't know his name, but the name formed in her mind, a whisper of destiny, finally withdrew his hand, his gaze lingering on hers for another fraction of a second, a silent promise in the parting. He offered a slight, almost imperceptible bow, a gesture of unexpected grace from such a wild figure. "My apologies, Signora, 1,000 pardons." With a final, enigmatic glance at Antonetta, he melted back into the shadows of the street below, his presence leaving a potent echo. The clink of champagne glasses and the drone of polite conversation at the gala faded into a distant hum, eclipsed by the vibrant, unfamiliar symphony now playing beneath Antonetta's composure. Vronsky's brief, searing gaze had not merely shaken her, it had ignited a defiant flame, a potent force that shattered the quiet despair she had meticulously managed for years. Her gilded cage, once a refuge of predictable sorrow, now felt like a prison, its bars suddenly stark against the intoxicating glimpse of a world beyond. A world where the memory of his eyes burned like a promise of something dangerously, thrillingly alive. She didn't know what it meant, only that her carefully constructed world had just been irrevocably altered. And there was no turning back to the quiet resignation of before. The air itself seemed charged, pulling her with an invisible thread towards something unknown, something vibrant and real. a glimmer of color against the elegant monochrome of her existence. As the night deepened, a profound, unsettling certainty settled within her. The freedom she had glimpsed, however fleeting, demanded pursuit. And she knew, with a thrill that trembled on the precipice of fear, that the testing of her golden cage had only just begun. Chapter 2. A Glimmer of Color. 3 days since the Rossi Gala, Antonetta moved through the immaculate silence of her penthouse. But the exquisite order of her life now felt paper-thin. The memory of Vronsky's eyes, a defiant spark against the opulent gloom of the evening, had not dimmed. Instead, it pulsed with a vibrant, insistent rhythm beneath her skin. That tantalizing glimpse of freedom had ignited a profound, unsettling certainty, an invisible compass now spinning wildly, its needle pulling her with an undeniable force towards a world beyond her gilded bars. Her meticulously curated existence, once a refuge, now felt like an unbearable challenge, beckoning her to step into the dangerous, thrilling unknown. The Duomo penthouse, usually a sanctuary of refined elegance, had become a gleaming cage. Each perfect angle, every minimalist surface, echoed her internal emptiness with unnerving precision. She found herself in her private study, a space usually dedicated to architectural blueprints and strategic planning, but now her mind refused to settle on anything so tangible. The holographic interface of her work tablet glowed unnoticed on the desk, replaced by an antique, leather-bound journal she hadn't touched in years. Its pages, filled with adolescent poetry and half-formed dreams, felt alien to the woman she had become, yet resonated with a yearning she now recognized as her own. Antonetta traced the delicate script with a slender finger, a faint smile touching her lips. The girl who wrote these words had once believed in magic, in the wild, untamed beauty of emotion. Where had that girl gone? Buried, she realized, under layers of expectation, duty, and the relentless pursuit of bella figura. But Vronsky's gaze had unearthed her, brought her shimmering to the surface like a forgotten jewel. The impulse to find him was no longer a fleeting thought, it was a gravitational pull, growing stronger with each passing hour. She didn't know his name then, only the visceral impact of his presence. He was the antithesis of her world, disheveled, intense, unapologetically real. She rose from her desk, the soft silk of her robe whispering against her skin. Her gaze drifted to the floor-to-ceiling windows, which offered a panoramic view of Milan, the Duomo's spires piercing the azure sky. The city, usually a source of pride, now felt like a vast, glittering prison. Her fingers instinctively found their way to her laptop, not to check her work schedule, but to type Brera art exhibitions into the search bar. The memory of his rough linen jacket, smelling faintly of turpentine and something wild, pointed her towards the bohemian heart of the city. She scrolled through images of galleries and studios, her heart thrumming with an unfamiliar excitement. Then, a peculiar flyer caught her eye, stark black text on a raw canvas texture, announcing an exhibition titled Echoes of Milan, a solo show by VK. The typography was unconventional, almost rebellious, and one of the abstract brushstrokes in the background seemed to shimmer with the exact colors she remembered in his eyes: ochre, deep crimson, and a startling vibrant blue. VK, it had to be him. A shiver, not of cold but of exhilarating anticipation, ran down her spine. The address was a narrow street just off the main piazza in Brera, an unassuming space that promised to be anything but ordinary. She dressed carefully, not in her usual pristine designer power suit, but in an understated linen dress in a muted olive, comfortable yet elegant. Her hair was still impeccably styled, a concession to habit, but she left her face bare of all but the lightest touch of makeup, an uncharacteristic rebellion. As she descended in the private elevator, her reflection stared back at her, a stranger with a glint of defiance in her eyes. The woman looking back was no longer merely Antonetta Ricci, wife of Frank Ricci, acclaimed architect. She was Antonetta, an individual on the cusp of rediscovery. The Brera district hummed with an entirely different rhythm from the polished precision of the city center. Cobblestone streets snaked between ancient buildings adorned with ivy and wrought iron balconies. The scent of espresso mingled with fresh paint and blooming jasmine. Antonetta felt an immediate, subtle loosening of the tightness in her chest, a sense of breathing more freely. This was not the Milan she inhabited, but a Milan she remembered from her university days, full of messy, vibrant life. She found the gallery on a quiet side street, its entrance marked by a hand-painted wooden sign, rather than a sleek neon display. The building itself was old, with chipped stucco and heavy wooden doors. Taking a deep breath, Antonetta pushed the door open, the faint clang of a bell announcing her arrival. Inside, the space was small, raw, and utterly captivating. Unfinished brick walls served as a backdrop for a kaleidoscope of color and form. It wasn't the kind of conceptual, minimalist art Antonetta was accustomed to seeing in Milan's prestigious galleries. This was art that pulsed with life, with a raw, almost visceral energy. Large canvases dominated the room, depicting distorted cityscapes, swirling abstract emotions, and portraits that seemed to capture the very souls of their subjects. The colors were bold, almost aggressive, clashing and blending, in a glorious defiant dance. A vibrant orange sunset over a melancholic Milanese canal, a chaotic swirl of brushstrokes representing the internal angst of a figure trapped within a golden frame. Eyes, always eyes, staring out from the canvas with an intensity that made Antonetta catch her breath. She walked slowly, drawn deeper into the artist's world. There was a freedom, an unbridled passion in each stroke that resonated with the burgeoning feelings within her. This wasn't just paint on canvas, it was a language, spoken directly to her own burgeoning sense of rebellion. "You understand it, don't you?" a voice rumbled from behind her, deep and resonant. Antonetta turned, her heart leaping. Vronsky. He stood near a massive, swirling abstract, his hands shoved into the pockets of paint-splattered jeans. His dark hair was, as she remembered, a glorious mess, and his eyes, those intense, searing eyes, held hers with an unnerving familiarity. He wore a simple, unbuttoned linen shirt, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin and the subtle play of muscle beneath. He looked utterly at home, amidst the vibrant chaos of his work. I think I do," Antonetta managed, a tremor in her voice she hoped he wouldn't notice. "It's alive." He smiled then, a slow, genuine smile that softened the edges of his intensity. "That's the point, isn't it? To make the canvas breathe, to make it scream, laugh, rage. To make it feel." He gestured around the room. Most people look at art and see lines, colors, shapes. They categorize, they analyze, they try to fit it into a neat little box. But art isn't meant to be contained. It's meant to break free. He moved closer, his presence radiating an almost magnetic energy that Antonetta found herself leaning into. Like life, no? We spend so much time building these perfect little boxes for ourselves, for our lives. We paint them with the finest colors, furnish them with the most exquisite things, and then we wonder why we feel suffocated. He turned his gaze directly to her, and Antonetta felt as if he was looking not at her perfectly styled exterior, but directly into the restless core of her being. "You felt it at the gala, didn't you? The gilded cage." Antonetta's breath hitched. How could he know? She hadn't spoken a word. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "More than I realized until that moment." "That moment," he echoed, a knowing glint in his eyes. When the illusion began to crack, he moved to a bench positioned beneath a particularly vibrant piece, an explosive abstract that seemed to defy gravity. "Sit. Tell me, what do you truly see?" Antonetta sat, feeling an unaccustomed relaxation settle over her. She pointed to a swirl of cerulean and crimson. "I see a soul trying to break free. A desperate, beautiful struggle." Vronsky nodded, leaning forward, his elbow on his knee. "Good. You don't filter. Most people filter. They censor their emotions, their thoughts, their very existence, all in the name of, what? Decorum? Acceptability? Bella figura? He scoffed, the word dripping with disdain. It's a beautiful prison, that concept. A gilded cage indeed. It promises beauty and perfection, but demands authenticity as the price. It's how we survive in this city, Antonetta found herself saying, surprised by her own defensiveness. It's the very fabric of our society, and what a fragile fabric it is, he countered gently, held together by threads of gossip, envy and fear. Fear of not belonging, of not being enough, of not being perfect. His gaze intensified. But tell me, Antonetta Ricci, is perfection truly fulfilling? He knew her name. Of course he would. He'd been at the gala, seen her with Frank. The knowledge didn't bother her. Rather, it made her feel even more seen. No, she admitted, the word a raw confession. It's profoundly, exquisitely empty. I've built a life that on the surface is everything anyone could ever want, and yet I feel hollow. The words poured out of her, unbidden, unedited. It was a liberation. She hadn't spoken like this to anyone, not even Sophia, in years. Hollow, Vronsky repeated, a sympathetic hum in his voice. Because you're an architect, Antonetta. You build structures, but you've forgotten to build one for yourself. One that allows for the chaos, the imperfection, the magnificent mess of being truly alive. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. What is it you truly desire? Not what society dictates, not what Frank expects. What does Antonetta desire? The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken possibilities. Antonetta looked at his art, then back at him. Color, she said, surprising herself. I want a glimmer of color, in a world that feels increasingly grey. Vronsky smiled, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. Then you've come to the right place. That's what I try to capture, the hidden colors, the ones we're afraid to show. He stood, walking over to a smaller canvas tucked away in a corner. It was a portrait, raw and unfinished, of a woman with an elegant posture, but a profound weariness in her eyes. It wasn't her, not exactly, but the underlying emotion resonated so deeply it startled her. I call this one, The Silent Scream. It's about the beauty in quiet despair, the strength in suppressed emotion. They talked for hours. About art, about life, about the suffocating nature of societal expectations, and the relentless pursuit of an outward facade. Vronsky spoke of his childhood in a small coastal town, his journey to Milan, and his fierce dedication to his art as a means of expressing the raw, unfiltered truth of the human experience. He spoke with a passion that ignited a dormant spark within Antonetta, making her feel alive in a way she hadn't since her youth. Antonetta, in turn, found herself sharing details she never would have imagined exposing. The pressure of her career, the emotional distance in her marriage, the subtle way she felt her identity had been subsumed by her role. She spoke of her architectural aspirations, her desire to create spaces that truly nourished the soul, not just impressed the eye. Vronsky listened, truly listened, his intense gaze never wavering, making her feel utterly, profoundly seen. It was exhilarating, a dangerous dance on the edge of a precipice, yet she felt no fear, only a soaring sense of freedom. The sun began to dip, casting long shadows through the gallery, painting the vibrant canvases in ever-shifting hues. Antonetta realized she had lost all track of time. It was a sensation she hadn't experienced in years, her life usually governed by the rigid precision of her calendar. I should go, she said finally, a reluctance in her voice that was almost painful. Must you? Vronsky asked, his voice soft, but his eyes pleaded. Yes, Antonetta replied, forcing a smile. My husband expects me. The words felt like a lead weight on her tongue after the lightness of their conversation. Vronsky nodded, a shadow passing over his face. Of course. The cage has strong bars. He walked her to the door. But the color, Antonetta. Now that you've seen it, can you unsee it? She looked back at his canvases, at the vibrant, expressive world he had created, and then at him, his face illuminated by the setting sun, a man who lived without apology. No, she whispered, her voice firm. I don't think I can. She felt a strange lightness, a dizzying sense of possibility. Thank you, Vronsky. He inclined his head, a gesture of quiet understanding. Until the next glimpse of color, Antonetta. The city traffic hummed with its usual evening rhythm as Antonetta navigated her car through the labyrinthine streets towards her meeting with Sophia. Her skin still tingled from the encounter with Vronsky, her mind a whirlwind of exhilarating thoughts and new sensations. She felt a profound shift within her, a palpable vibrancy that she hadn't possessed that morning. She met Sophia Rossi at an outdoor cafe terrace near the Quadrilatero della Moda, a place of chic elegance and discreet conversations. Sophia, impeccably dressed as always, with a knowing glint in her warm brown eyes, was already sipping an espresso. Sophia had been Antonetta's closest friend since university, a steady anchor in the sometimes turbulent waters of Milanese society. She possessed a keen intelligence and an intuitive understanding of Antonetta's often reserved nature. "Antonetta, there you are," Sophia greeted, a genuine smile lighting her face. "You're late, which is utterly unlike you." And, she paused, her gaze sweeping over Antonetta. "You look different." Antonetta slid into the chair opposite her, feeling a rush of warmth at Sophia's familiar presence. "Different how?" she asked, a small, unbidden smile playing on her lips. She ordered a glass of sparkling water, her usual strict regimen of afternoon caffeine forgotten. Sophia leaned forward, her eyes twinkling. "Animated, radiant even. There's a spark, something new. What has happened to my perfectly composed friend?" Antonetta laughed, a genuine bubbling sound she rarely allowed to escape. "Is it so obvious?" "To me, yes. You usually arrive looking like you've just stepped out of a fashion spread, impeccably serene. Today, you look like you've just discovered a secret joy." Sophia took another sip of her espresso, her gaze unwavering. "Do tell, is it a new project at the firm? Has Frank finally agreed to that sabbatical you've been dreaming of?" Antonetta hesitated, the words about Vronsky bubbling on her tongue, yet held back by an instinctual caution. This was too raw, too fragile, too dangerous to expose just yet, even to Sophia. She knew Sophia would listen, would understand, but she also knew Sophia's pragmatic, grounded nature might instinctively recoil from such impulsiveness. "No, nothing so grand," Antonetta deflected, trying to rein in her almost feverish energy. I've been thinking a lot about my work, about the purpose of architecture, and I had a truly invigorating afternoon." She gestured vaguely. "I visited a new gallery in Brera. The art was incredibly expressive. It reminded me of a passion I think I've suppressed for too long." Sophia's eyebrows rose slightly. "Brera? You? How delightfully bohemian. And what kind of art could possibly make Antonetta Ricci glow like this?" "You usually prefer the classics or sterile conceptual pieces." There was a note of genuine curiosity, tinged with a subtle, cautious concern in Sophia's voice. She knew Antonetta's invigorating afternoon was code for something far more profound. "It was different," Antonetta said, trying to keep her voice even. "Vibrant, raw, it just spoke to me. About authenticity, about stripping away the layers." Sophia studied her, her expression thoughtful. "Authenticity, that's a word you don't hear often in our circles, or certainly not one that makes people radiant." She smiled warmly, but her eyes held a hint of worry. "Antonetta, my dear, I am thrilled to see you so alive, but I also sense a certain recklessness about this new energy. Is everything truly all right? Your life, your marriage?" Antonetta reached across the table, covering Sophia's hand briefly. "Everything is changing, Sophia. Inside, at least." She offered a soft, almost wistful smile. "It feels like..." I've glimpsed a glimmer of color in a world I thought was only black and white. The glorious, terrifying unknown beckoned, and Antonetta, for the first time in years, found herself utterly incapable of resisting. The meticulously polished facade she presented to Milan, to Frank, to herself, now felt like a fragile, hollow shell. She knew with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified that the glimpses of color Vronsky promised were not just an invitation, but a command she was destined to follow. Yet, as the city lights blurred outside her window, painting the velvet darkness with distant flickers, a shadow crept into her exhilaration. Milan was a city built on appearances, on watchful eyes and whispered judgments. Frank, with his chillingly perceptive gaze, was a master of discerning the slightest crack in perfection. She was about to weave a secret life, a vibrant tapestry of stolen moments, but every thread she pulled would inevitably tighten around her, creating a beautiful, perilous knot. The web was forming, and Antonetta was about to find herself caught, exhilaratingly and terrifyingly, at its very center. Chapter 3: The Tangled Web. The glorious, terrifying unknown had indeed beckoned, and Antonetta, for the first time in years, was answering its call. Each clandestine meeting with Vronsky, a shared glance across a sun-dappled piazza, a hushed conversation in the shadowed alcoves of Café Aurora, the exhilarating brush of his hand, felt like a defiant stitch in the vibrant, perilous tapestry she was weaving. A thrilling, intoxicating rebellion pulsed beneath her carefully composed facade, a potent counterpoint to the quiet dread that one wrong move, one misplaced thread, could unravel everything. Over the ensuing weeks, Antonetta found herself expertly navigating a treacherous double life. Mornings began, as always, at 5:45 a.m., with the meticulous ritual of the Duomo penthouse, Frank's crisp shirts, her impeccably tailored ensembles, the curated perfection of their shared existence. She moved through her days at Moretti Architects with the same cool competence, guiding her team through complex designs, attending high-level meetings, her mind sharp and focused. But now, woven into the fabric of this disciplined routine, were stolen hours, moments that tasted of forbidden fruit and burned with an intensity she had only ever dreamed of. Their initial rendezvous points were careful, almost theatrical in their secrecy. Café Aurora, a secluded gem tucked away on a quiet side street in Brera, became their first sanctuary. Its amber lighting, the scent of rich espresso and old paperbacks, offered a cocoon where Antonetta could shed her professional armor. Here their conversations, once tentative, blossomed into an intimate dance of minds. Vronsky spoke of art not as a profession, but as a visceral scream, a yearning to tear away the layers of pretense that suffocated modern life. He watched her, not with polite admiration, but with an X-ray gaze that seemed to strip away her carefully constructed composure, revealing the restless soul beneath. She, in turn, found herself articulating anxieties, dreams, and frustrations she hadn't dared voice to herself, let alone to Frank. She spoke of the pressure to embody bella figura, of the endless social choreography, of the suffocating weight of expectations. Vronsky would simply listen, his fingers tracing patterns on the condensation of his glass, his eyes never leaving hers. And Antonetta felt profoundly, terrifyingly seen. From the café, their escapades grew bolder. They took long, meandering walks through the quieter stretches of Parco Sempione, beneath the ancient boughs of plane trees, whose leaves had witnessed centuries of clandestine whispers. In these moments, Antonetta would feel the cool breeze on her face, the unfamiliar lightness in her chest, as if the very air of Milan was different when Vronsky was by her side. They would talk about everything and nothing, the transient beauty of a blooming jacaranda, the absurdity of a public art installation, the philosophy of fleeting moments. Once, he stopped to point out a tiny, nearly invisible crack in the marble of the Arch of Peace, explaining how even imperfections told a story. And Antonetta realized that was what he did for her. He found the cracks in her polished facade and celebrated the stories they told. The shift from emotional intimacy to physical, was as inevitable as the changing Milanese light. One rain-swept afternoon, seeking refuge from an unexpected downpour, they found themselves in Vronsky's studio, in the heart of Brera. The space was a glorious, chaotic antithesis to her penthouse. Easels crowded with half-finished canvases, tubes of paint spilling their vibrant guts onto makeshift palettes. The air thick, with the earthy scent of turpentine and creativity. Vronsky, his dark hair damp and clinging to his forehead, had simply taken her hand. His touch was a jolt, an electric current that bypassed all her carefully erected defenses. There, amidst the riot of color and the silent hum of artistic fervor, their lips met. It was not a gentle, exploratory kiss. It was a hungry, desperate claiming. A torrent of pent-up desire that had been simmering beneath weeks of charged glances and unspoken words. Antonetta felt her carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. His hands, rough and paint-stained, tangled in her hair, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. Her silk blouse, her bespoke skirt, the very uniform of her Milanese persona, felt suddenly flimsy, constricting. She tore at his shirt, wanting to feel the raw skin beneath, the pulse of his life against hers. In Vronsky's arms, Antonetta shed the layers of bella figura she had worn for a lifetime. Her body, once a vessel for elegant display, became a landscape of untamed sensation. Each caress, each whisper, was a revelation. With Frank, intimacy was a duty, a planned occasion devoid of spontaneity. With Vronsky, it was an explosion, an act of pure, unadulterated release. She discovered a physicality, a primal hunger within herself, that she had never known existed. Her moans were raw, uninhibited, sounds she hadn't realized her throat could produce. Afterwards, lying tangled amidst canvases and discarded rags, her skin still humming, Vronsky would trace the line of her collarbone and she would gaze at the ceiling, feeling profoundly, exquisitely alive. But with this exhilarating passion came a gnawing counterpoint: profound guilt. The thrill of rebellion was intoxicating, but the shadow of Frank, of her vows, of the glittering cage she inhabited, never fully receded. Leaving Vronsky's studio, stepping back into the bustling streets of Brera, Antonetta would meticulously adjust her clothes, smooth her hair, and reconstruct her composed facade. But inside, a maelstrom raged, a tempest of exhilarating freedom clashing with the bitter taste of deception. She felt like two women: one, the fiery, uninhibited lover in Vronsky's arms; the other, the polished, dutiful wife gliding through Milanese high society. The knowledge that she was deceiving Frank, a man whose ambition and influence cast a long shadow, tightened a knot of anxiety in her stomach. The potential consequences of exposure loomed like a guillotine, threatening to sever not just her marriage, but her entire meticulously curated existence. The penthouse, once a symbol of her achievement, now felt like a gilded prison, its silence amplified by the secrets she carried. Frank, with his keen eye for detail and his formidable control, was not blind. Slowly, subtly, he began to notice the shifts in Antonetta. He observed her across the expansive dining table during their meticulously planned evening events, even in the quiet moments before sleep. "You've been invigorated, Antonetta," Frank remarked one evening, swirling the ruby liquid in his glass of Barolo. His tone was smooth, almost admiring, but his gaze, usually distant, was now sharp, assessing. "Your projects must be truly exceptional." Antonetta felt a flush creep up her neck, quickly suppressing it. "Yes, Frank, a new civic center proposal. It requires a certain passion." She forced a light laugh, but the word felt like a lie. He nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing imperceptibly. "Passion is commendable, but one must remember the importance of discretion, even in the pursuit of artistic endeavors. And loyalty, of course." The veiled comment struck her like a physical blow. She feigned a polite smile. "Of course, Frank. Loyalty is the bedrock of any successful partnership." Her voice was steady, betraying none of the internal tremors. Other changes didn't escape his notice. Antonetta, usually punctual to a fault, occasionally arrived home later than expected, her excuses vague. A meeting ran long, caught in traffic, researching a new gallery for a client. Her attention, once entirely devoted to their shared social calendar and the intricate workings of their household, sometimes seemed to wander. At dinner she would occasionally stare into space, a distant, almost wistful expression on her face, before snapping back to attention, too quickly, too brightly. One Sunday, as they sat in their minimalist living room, the Duomo a majestic backdrop, Frank laid aside Il Sole 24 Ore. "I've noticed you've been spending rather more time in Brera recently, Antonetta," he said, his voice deceptively casual. "Are your interests shifting from the grand to the bohemian?" Antonetta's heart skipped a beat. She had attributed her visits to Brera to art research, a plausible enough explanation given her profession. "The new exhibitions are quite compelling, Frank. It's important to stay current." "Indeed," he replied, a faint, almost imperceptible curl of his lip. "But one must also remember one's duties, my dear, to our reputation, to our position, to each other." His words were calm, measured, yet they carried the weight of a silent threat. Antonetta felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. His suspicions were not just a passing observation, they were a calculated vigilance. The atmosphere in the penthouse, once merely sterile, now felt charged with an unspoken tension, a chilling emotional distance that deepened with each veiled question, each pointed remark. He was closing in, and she was trapped in a tightening web of her own making. The whispers, once an abstract fear, soon solidified into tangible dread. The setting was a lavish luncheon at a high-end restaurant near the Quadrilatero della Moda, a gathering of Milan's elite. The air shimmered with polite conversation, the clinking of crystal, and the subtle, venomous undercurrent of social scrutiny. Antonetta, impeccably dressed in a tailored cream suit, maintained her most composed facade, but beneath it, her nerves hummed like taut wires. She sat opposite Alessia Visconti, a woman whose perfectly coiffed blonde hair and impeccably manicured nails belied a sharp, observant mind and an even sharper tongue. Alessia embodied the judgmental and unforgiving nature of Milanese society, a walking, breathing testament to the power of gossip. The conversation flowed around them, touching on everything from the latest fashion collections to the fluctuating stock market. Then, Alessia leaned forward, her smile thin, her eyes, usually darting, fixing on Antonetta with unsettling intensity. "Darling Antonetta," Alessia purred, her voice carrying just enough to be overheard by a few key socialites at their table. "You seem quite revitalized lately. Is it a new spa regime, perhaps? Or have you found a new muse for your architectural wonders?" Antonetta's breath hitched. She forced a light laugh. "Just the usual demands of my work, Alessia. Design can be quite invigorating." Alessia's smile widened, revealing a glint of genuine malice. "Ah, yes, design. So many temptations, aren't there? Especially in those more bohemian districts. One hears such stories about Brera, with its artists and their passionate endeavors." She took a delicate sip of her Prosecco, her gaze never leaving Antonetta's face. "It's so easy for eyes to wander, isn't it? To be drawn by something new, something raw. But then, darling, the tangles begin. And a reputation, once unraveled, is so very hard to restitch." The thinly veiled comment hung in the air, a poisoned dart aimed directly at Antonetta. The casual chatter around them seemed to dim, the clinking of glasses suddenly deafening. Antonetta felt a cold chill spread through her veins, a dreadful recognition. Alessia's words weren't just a random social observation. They were a deliberate, unmistakable warning. The whispers had started. The threads of her carefully woven deception were beginning to show, visible to the sharp, unforgiving eyes of Milanese society. Her gilded world, once a shield, was now a magnifying glass. Frank's calculated silence had become a suffocating weight, while the whispers of Milan's elite no longer merely buzzed, they sharpened into a distinct venomous hum, a chorus poised to strike. The threads of Antonetta's tangled web, once merely binding, were now actively constricting, each strand a watchful eye, each knot a whispered judgment. The abyss wasn't a distant threat, it was the ground beneath her, crumbling. She had known, somewhere deep down, that her carefully constructed world of clandestine glances and stolen moments could not last. But the facade was no longer enough. Soon the casual brush of a familiar face in a crowded gallery, or a seemingly innocuous post on a social feed, would become weapons. Soon the delicate dance of deception would end, giving way to the blunt force of accusation. Soon the threads would either snap, or Antonetta would have to make a choice: succumb to the suffocating silence of her old life, or embrace the roaring inferno of the new, consequences be damned. Chapter 4. Whispers and Watchful Eyes. The venomous hum of Milan's elite, sharpened into a distinct, accusatory chorus, was no longer a distant threat, but a constant thrum beneath Antonetta's skin. Every social glance felt like a probe, every hushed conversation a potential whisper about her unraveling life. Even in the clandestine comfort of Vronsky's presence, the grand arches of the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II, usually a marvel, now felt like 1,000 watchful eyes, reflecting not only the city's opulent facade, but also the precarious truth of their stolen moments. As Vronsky's fingers brushed hers over a coffee cup, a familiar face, one of Frank's inner circle, rounded the corner of the historic arcade, freezing the breath in Antonetta's throat. It was Marco Rossi, Frank's most trusted legal counsel, a man whose placid smile concealed a mind as sharp and calculating as Frank's own. Antonetta's hand flew back from Vronsky's, as if scalded, sending a ripple across the surface of her espresso. Her heart, a frantic hummingbird, hammered against her ribs. She forced a smile, a brittle, fragile thing, that felt as though it might shatter her jaw. Antonetta? What a delightful surprise! Marco's voice, usually a smooth baritone, seemed to grate on her nerves, each syllable a judgment. His gaze, though seemingly polite, lingered for a fraction too long on Vronsky, who had instinctively straightened, a faint flush rising on his artist's cheekbones. Vronsky, ever the nonconformist, wore a worn leather jacket over a dark t-shirt, a stark contrast to Marco's impeccably tailored suit. Antonetta's mind raced, a frantic scramble for a plausible narrative. "Marco, hello," she managed, her voice a reedy whisper. She extended a hand towards Vronsky, a gesture that felt both forced and desperately performative. "This is Vronsky, an artist whose work I've been admiring in Brera. I was just passing by after a meeting and saw him." She paused, her eyes darting nervously between the two men. "We were discussing a potential piece for the upcoming Sforza Group charity auction. You know how Frank is about supporting the arts." Vronsky, catching her cue, offered a stiff nod. "Signor Rossi," he said, his voice deeper than usual, an uncharacteristic formality coating his words. He was trying, she could see, to play the part, but the wildness in his eyes, the subtle defiance that was so integral to his charm, refused to be entirely contained. Marco's smile tightened at the corners, a gesture Antonetta knew all too well. It was the smile of a man who saw through veneers, who passed implications. "Of course. Frank is indeed a generous patron. It's commendable, Antonetta, that you extend your philanthropic efforts to the emerging talent. Brera, you say, a vibrant district." His gaze swept over Vronsky once more, a quiet assessment that felt like an invasion. "Well, I mustn't keep you from your artistic discussions. So much philanthropy to be done." "A pleasure, Vronsky." He offered a curt nod to them both, then continued on his way, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor of the Galleria. Antonetta didn't breathe until Marco's figure had disappeared into the throng of luxury shoppers. She slumped back into her chair, her entire body trembling. The coffee cup clattered as she set it down. "God," she whispered, her face pale. "God, Vronsky, that was too close." Vronsky reached across the small table, covering her hand with his. His touch, usually a balm, now felt like a conduit for her rising anxiety. Who was he? Frank's associate. His lawyer. His closest confidant, Antonetta explained, pulling her hand away gently, needing to feel the cool air on her skin. He sees everything, reports everything. He's Frank's shadow. The grand, ornate ceiling of the Galleria, once a symbol of Milanese splendor, now pressed down on her, an oppressive weight. Every passing face, every casual glance, felt imbued with Marco Rossi's knowing suspicion. The encounter had not just heightened the stakes, it had ripped away the last vestiges of illusion that their affair could remain safely hidden within the city's vastness. Milan was not vast enough. It was a labyrinth of watchful eyes, and she was caught in its center. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of pristine order, felt like a meticulously arranged interrogation room that evening. Frank was waiting for her in his study, a room Antonetta rarely entered unless summoned. The scent of aged leather and expensive cigars hung heavy in the air. He sat behind his imposing mahogany desk, not working, but simply waiting, his hands clasped, his gaze fixed on the door. He was silhouetted against the sweeping view of the Duomo, a titan in his natural habitat. Antonetta's spine stiffened as she entered, the memory of Marco Rossi's smile a cold knot in her stomach. She had tried to compose herself in the taxi home, but the lingering tremor in her hands betrayed her. "Antonetta," Frank said, his voice unnervingly calm, devoid of any discernible emotion. "Please, sit." He gestured to the leather armchair opposite his desk, a chair that felt less like an invitation and more like a designated witness box. She sat, her posture as regal and unyielding as she could manage, but inside, a tide of dread was rising. She knew this tone. This was Frank, not the husband, but the formidable CEO, the strategist, the man who meticulously managed his assets, and she was one of them. He steepled his fingers, his eyes, usually calculating, now chillingly devoid of warmth. "I believe we need to have a candid discussion about your recent activities." Antonetta swallowed. "My activities? My schedule is as always, Frank. Moretti Architects, the foundation meetings, the occasional gallery visit for potential philanthropic acquisitions, as you well know." She tried to inject a note of innocent indignation into her voice, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. Frank merely smiled, a slow, predatory curve of his lips. He pushed a tablet across the desk towards her. On the screen was a detailed ledger, meticulously compiled. "Is it, Antonetta? My financial team is very efficient. We track all significant expenditures, of course, particularly those that deviate from the established patterns. Here," he pointed with a precise finger, "a series of small, cash-only transactions. Cafes in Brera. A small trattoria, also in Brera. These are not your usual establishments, are they? And the timings, often during your lunch hour, or late afternoon, when your calendar shows you should be elsewhere." Antonetta's gaze flickered over the screen. The dates, the times, the locations, they were all painfully accurate. Small, inconspicuous places where she and Vronsky had shared coffee, a quick meal, stolen moments of conversation. She felt a sickening lurch, a sudden awareness of how transparent her clandestine moments truly were under Frank's all-seeing eye. "And then there's your driver's logs," Frank continued, not waiting for her reply. He navigated to another screen, several instances of unscheduled detours or significantly extended journeys to and from Brera. When questioned, Giuseppe mentioned you preferred to walk some distance after being dropped off. A sudden fondness for exercise, perhaps. His voice remained even, but each word was a razor's edge. Antonetta clenched her jaw, her nails digging into her palms. The sheer, terrifying extent of his surveillance stunned her. He had been watching, calculating, gathering evidence with the cold precision of a hunter. "And of course," Frank added, leaning back, his eyes never leaving hers, "Marco mentioned he had a rather unexpected encounter this afternoon." In the Galleria Vittorio Emanuele II. With you, Antonetta, and an artist from Brera. He paused, letting the implication hang heavy in the air. Coincidences, perhaps? Or a pattern emerging? It was a chance meeting, Frank, Antonetta insisted, her voice trembling despite her best efforts. As I told Marco, I was discussing a potential art acquisition for the Sforza Group auction. He's a talented young artist. I thought you'd be pleased with my initiative. Frank's gaze sharpened, piercing her flimsy defense. Pleased with your initiative, Antonetta, when it involves jeopardizing our reputation? Our family name? The Sforza Group's standing? His voice, though still quiet, dropped in pitch, a subtle shift that conveyed immense power and menace. Loyalty, Antonetta, is the bedrock of our partnership. Discretion, the unwritten rule of our society. Milanese society is an intricate web, and a reputation, once sullied, is almost impossible to restore. He stood then, walking around the desk to stand directly in front of her. His shadow enveloped her. You are not merely Antonetta Moretti. You are Antonetta Moretti Ricci, my wife, the face of my enterprise, and I expect you to remember what that means. To uphold the standards, to ensure that nothing, and I mean nothing, compromises our position. Or mine. His meaning was chillingly clear. Her happiness, her choices, were secondary to his control, his image, his power. The unspoken threat of public humiliation, of complete ruin, hung between them, suffocating her. Consider this a reminder of your responsibilities. Antonetta could only nod, her throat tight with a mixture of fear and a burgeoning, desperate anger. She felt as though she were drowning, caught in a suffocating current of Frank's influence. Later that night, the Duomo lights glittering coldly outside her penthouse window, Antonetta found herself slumped on her sofa, phone clutched in her trembling hand. She had sought refuge in her private social media feeds, a misguided attempt to connect with a world that felt increasingly distant, only to discover it had become another mirror, reflecting her impending doom. The social echo, as Sophia had so aptly named it, was no longer a distant hum. It was a cacophony. She scrolled numbly, her finger dragging through a deluge of veiled comments, cryptic emojis, and seemingly innocuous but undeniably pointed posts. A socialite she barely knew had posted a picture of an empty birdcage with the caption, "Some gilded cages are beautiful, but they can't hold a truly wild spirit for long." Another, a friend of Alessia Visconti, shared a meme of a cat peering intently through blinds, captioned, "Always watching, always talking." Then came Alessia's own contribution. Antonetta's breath hitched as she saw it. A link to an article in Milanese Lifestyle, titled, "The Delicate Balance, Fragility of High Society Marriages in an Ever-Changing City." The author was listed as anonymous contributor, but the prose, the subtle digs, the thinly veiled references to unconventional interests, and unexpected dalliances among the city's elite, screamed Alessia Visconti. Beneath the article, a comment thread was already buzzing, a venomous chorus of speculation and judgment, though no names were explicitly named. The insinuation, however, was unmistakable. The entire online world, her world, seemed to be whispering about her. Her secret, her illicit passion, was no longer merely suspected by Frank. It was rapidly becoming public knowledge, or at least public speculation, amplified and distorted by the digital hive mind. Antonetta felt a profound sense of public scrutiny, of thousands of unseen eyes dissecting her life, judging her choices. The walls were not just closing in, they were becoming transparent, revealing her every move, every transgression. The golden cage was now a glass prison, and the world was watching her writhe. A deep, bone-wearying exhaustion settled over her, chilling her to the core. The next evening, Antonetta met Vronsky at a quiet, dimly lit bar in a forgotten corner of the Porta Nuova district. It was not their usual Brera haunt, a conscious decision to avoid the places that Frank's surveillance might have already pinpointed. The bar was almost empty, its jazz music soft, a comforting cloak around them. Antonetta looked utterly spent. Her usual impeccable composure had fractured, revealing raw edges of fear and desperation. She had chosen a simple black dress, no jewelry, as if stripping away the adornments of her old life. "Vronsky," she began, her voice barely a whisper, her eyes haunted. Everything is falling apart. Frank knows. Not everything, perhaps, but enough. He confronted me. He has evidence, credit card receipts, driver's logs. He had Marco Rossi see us in the Galleria yesterday. And the social media, it's a storm. Alessia Visconti has practically written an article about me. She recounted the events of the past 24 hours, the terror of Marco's unexpected appearance, the suffocating atmosphere of Frank's confrontation, the chilling realization of his surveillance, and the public shaming unfolding online. Her words tumbled out, breathless and urgent, each one laden with the crushing weight of impending doom. He threatened me, Vronsky, not with violence, but with something far worse for a woman in my position, with public ruin, with stripping away everything I have, everything I am. Vronsky listened, his hand resting gently over hers on the polished bar. His eyes, usually so vibrant, were filled with a profound sadness as he witnessed her unraveling. When she finally fell silent, breath shuddering, he squeezed her hand. "Antonetta," he said, his voice low and earnest, "look at me." She lifted her gaze, meeting his, and saw not pity, but a steady, unwavering resolve. This life you're living, is it truly a life if it demands you stifle every part of yourself? If it makes you feel empty, as you said? Is it worth keeping if it costs you your soul? He paused, searching her eyes. "I know this is terrifying. I know what Frank Ricci represents, what Milanese society can do, but what we have, what you have found within yourself, that spark, that desire for authenticity, that color you spoke of, it's real. And it's worth fighting for, worth risking for." He leaned closer, his eyes intense. "I love you, Antonetta. Not for your penthouse, not for your name, not for your bella figura. I love you. The woman who came to Brera, searching for something more. The woman who dares to dream, to feel, to live. Whatever comes, I will face it with you. We can find a way out of this gilded cage. Together." His words, passionate and unwavering, were a lifeline in the abyss. They ignited a flicker of defiance within Antonetta, a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. She looked at him, truly saw him, and in his fierce gaze, she found her own resolve solidifying. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a desperate, rebellious determination began to burn. She could not, would not, go back to the emptiness. She would choose him, she would choose herself. A few days later, Antonetta met Sophia for coffee in a discreet cafe near her firm. Sophia, her face etched with worry, wasted no time on pleasantries. "Antonetta, what is happening? I heard Marco Rossi mention something. And Alessia's article. Everyone is talking, whispering." Antonetta recounted, in a more measured tone, the bare facts of Frank's confrontation and the relentless social media storm. She omitted the intimacy of Vronsky's confession, guarding that fragile hope fiercely. Sophia listened, her expression growing increasingly grave. "Antonetta, you must understand the gravity of this. Frank Ricci is not just a man, he is an institution. You cannot defy him. Not like this. Milanese society, it's unforgiving, they will tear you apart." She reached across the table, her hand urgent on Antonetta's arm. "You stand to lose everything, your career, your financial security, your social standing, even your reputation, which is paramount here." "I know, Sophia," Antonetta said, her voice quiet, resolute. "I know what I risk. But I cannot go back. I cannot return to that life. It was a beautiful prison, but it was still a prison. And I have found something real. Something that makes me feel alive." Sophia's eyes filled with a desperate sadness. "Alive, Antonetta, but at what cost? You don't understand the power Frank wields. He will not simply let you walk away, not when it damages his image. He will crush you. He will make an example of you. And us, our friendship, it will become a liability for me, for anyone associated with you. Her voice, though pained, held a stark, pragmatic truth. Please, Antonetta, think about what you are doing. The consequences are irreversible. She had glimpsed color, felt true passion, known what it meant to be profoundly seen. She had made her choice. The abyss might await, but she would walk into it with her eyes open, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly, terrifyingly, free. She braced herself, knowing the battle had only just begun. But the whispers would not grow slowly into shouts. They would erupt, a cacophony of judgment. The watchful eyes would not merely condemn from afar, they would pierce her, cold and absolute, from across the polished floor of her own penthouse. Frank's promised retaliation would not be a slow descent into darkness, but an instantaneous, devastating demolition. The irrefutable evidence he had meticulously gathered now lay in wait, ready to shatter not just her fragile freedom, but her entire world. Chapter 5: The Unraveling. The chill that had settled deep within Antonetta's bones now coalesced into the physical presence of Frank, standing across the Duomo penthouse's vast marble floor. His gaze, colder than any Milanese winter, fixed on her, stripping away the defiant freedom she'd only just found. He said nothing, but the thick leather-bound dossier he laid on the glass table between them, overflowing with photographs and meticulously dated reports, screamed the cacophony of judgment she had braced herself for. The battle, she realized, had arrived. The unraveling had begun. Her heart hammered a desperate rhythm against her ribs, but her spine remained ramrod straight. She would not flinch. Not now. Not after glimpsing what lay beyond the gilded bars. Frank slowly rounded the table, his movements precise, almost surgical. He didn't sit, didn't invite her to. This was not a discussion. It was a pronouncement. "I gave you every opportunity, Antonetta," he began, his voice a low, dangerous rumble, utterly devoid of emotion. Warnings, veiled, then direct. "I told you about discretion, about loyalty, about the fragility of reputation. Yet you chose this." His long, elegant finger tapped the dossier. Antonetta looked at the stack of glossy prints. Her, laughing with Vronsky and Parco Sempione, her hand brushing his arm. Her, emerging from his Brera studio late one afternoon, her hair slightly disheveled, a smile still lingering on her lips. A close-up, undeniable shot of them kissing inside the studio, framed by canvases and paint-splattered walls. There were timestamps, geolocations, and detailed reports from a private investigator, tracking her movements with chilling accuracy. A printed screenshot from Vronsky's public social media, a photo of a new vibrant painting, captioned, "Found new colors in Milan's hidden corners, a muse as defiant as she is radiant." The date aligned with one of her clandestine visits. It was all there, damning and irrefutable. A wave of nausea washed over Antonetta, followed by a strange, cold calm. Shame was a fleeting tremor, quickly overridden by something akin to fury. Fury not at her choices, but at the systematic invasion, the calculated betrayal of privacy. "Is this all?" she asked, her voice surprisingly steady, though she felt it vibrate deep in her chest. Frank's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine surprise at her composure. "All. This is everything, Antonetta. This is the complete obliteration of the image we meticulously built, the reputation I worked my entire life to forge. Your recklessness, your selfishness." He spat the words, his control momentarily cracking. "You think this is some romantic adventure? Some bohemian dalliance? This is a desecration. Of our vows, of our standing, of my name." He walked to the panoramic window, his back to her, gazing out at the Duomo's spires, as if gathering strength from the very symbol of Milanese power and tradition. "You were meant to be my partner, my asset, the perfect complement to my ambition. Instead, you chose to be a common adulteress. The word hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Antonetta felt a primal scream rising in her throat, but she swallowed it down. She would not give him the satisfaction. "I found a glimmer of life, Frank," she said, her voice now louder, firmer. "Something real, something you never offered." He turned slowly, a chilling smile playing on his lips. "Real? You confuse a cheap thrill for reality. The reality is, Antonetta, you are my wife. You were my wife. And you will discover the true cost of betraying me." He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. "I gave you an out. You refused it. Now you will face the consequences." He made a swift call, his words clipped, decisive. "Initiate the proceedings. Immediately. I want the most aggressive approach. Every asset frozen. Every account inaccessible. Moretti Architects, gone. And I want the statement released within the hour. No ambiguity. Frame it as your reckless behavior, your inability to uphold your responsibilities. Paint me as the wronged party, dignified in my sorrow. Make sure it reaches every corner of the social echo, especially Alessia Visconti. She will be instrumental." He ended the call, his gaze returning to Antonetta, cold and triumphant. "Consider your golden cage not just opened, Antonetta, but shattered, and you, ejected into the cold." Antonetta stood there, rooted to the marble, long after Frank had exited the penthouse, leaving a void that pulsed with his venomous words. The silence stretched, deafening, then was abruptly shattered. Her phone, resting on the side table, began to vibrate, a relentless, insistent buzzing that quickly became a desperate, ringing cacophony. She picked it up, her fingers trembling. The first call was from a number she didn't recognize, but the caller ID flashed Studio Legale Bianchi. She ignored it. It rang again, immediately, and again. Then another number, Legal Affairs, the Sforza Group. Her breath hitched. Hesitantly she answered the third call, her voice a thin whisper. "Antonetta, Moretti Ricci." "Signora Moretti Ricci," a sharp formal voice began. "This is Avvocato Martesi from Bianchi. We have just received instructions to commence divorce proceedings on behalf of Sig, Frank Ricci. Given the circumstances, these proceedings will be initiated on grounds of infidelity, with a clear intent to protect our client's assets and reputation. We advise you to seek immediate legal counsel. Your accounts have been provisionally frozen, and a notice has been sent to Moretti Architects regarding your immediate dismissal and the cessation of all beneficial interests." The words blurred into a horrifying symphony of loss. Frozen, dismissal, cessation. She felt a cold sweat break out on her forehead. She hung up, her hand shaking, only for the phone to erupt again. Another call, this time from her own firm, a junior partner. His voice strained and apologetic. "Antonetta, I don't know what to say. We've just received a directive. Effective immediately, they've locked your access to the servers. Freezing of all company assets linked to your personal holdings. It's devastating. I'm so sorry." She mumbled something incoherent, her mind reeling. Moretti Architects. Her legacy, her life's work, gone. Just like that. She dropped the phone, unable to bear the relentless assault. It continued to ring, a death knell to her carefully constructed world. Then, a different kind of notification. Her phone buzzed, a series of quick alerts from her social media apps. Instagram, X, news feeds. Dread curling in her stomach. She picked it up again, the screen an inferno of notifications. The social echo was already ablaze. Frank's PR team had been terrifyingly efficient. A carefully crafted statement from the Sforza Group was trending. "It is with profound regret that we confirm the initiation of divorce proceedings between Sig, Frank Ricci, and Signora Antonetta Moretti Ricci. While this is a deeply personal matter, the group wishes to convey its sorrow over the unfortunate personal choices that have led to this separation. Sig. Ricci remains committed to his philanthropic work and corporate responsibilities, upholding the highest standards of integrity and discretion in all his affairs, and wishes his former wife well as she navigates her future path. It was a masterpiece of corporate spin, framing Frank as the stoic, wronged pillar of society, while subtly but clearly painting Antonetta as the reckless, irresponsible party. The unfortunate personal choices was a thinly veiled dagger. Below it, the comment section was a swirling maelstrom of judgment and condemnation. Knew she was trouble. Always too pretty to be faithful. Another Milanese socialite disgraces her husband. Where is the loyalty? Frank Ricci deserves better, a man of his stature. I heard rumors of an artist in Brera typical. And then Alessia Visconti, ever the conductor of the social orchestra, had retweeted the statement, adding her own pointed commentary, such a shame when brilliance is overshadowed by indiscretion. Some reputations, once unraveled, can never be rewoven. Milan remembers everything. The venom was palpable, searing her eyes as she scrolled. Accusations, slut-shaming, moral outrage, all delivered with the swift, merciless efficiency of the online mob. She saw photos of herself, taken from old gala events, now juxtaposed with crude memes. Her professional achievements were belittled, her intelligence dismissed as a front for her hedonism. Her meticulously curated life, meticulously maintained for bella figura, was being torn apart, thread by exquisite thread, for the entire world to see. Her inbox, meanwhile, was a wasteland. No messages from friends, no calls of support, only the relentless drone of legal notifications and the digital screams of anonymous judgment. Her world, in the space of hours, had not just collapsed, it had been publicly incinerated. Blindly, Antonetta grabbed her coat, not even bothering to change out of the silk dress she had worn for Frank's final, devastating pronouncement. Her penthouse, once her gilded cage, was now a tomb of echoing accusations and digital vitriol. She had to escape. Her legs carried her through the familiar streets, though they felt alien now, each building a witness to her downfall. The cool Milanese air did little to quell the inferno raging within her. She ignored the glances, the whispers, the possibility that the news had already spread to every cafe and boutique. All that mattered was reaching Vronsky. His Brera studio, when she finally stumbled into it, was a haven of familiar chaos. The scent of turpentine and oil paints, canvases stacked against every wall, music playing softly from a dusty speaker. Vronsky, startled by her sudden, disheveled appearance, dropped his brush onto a pallet with a clatter. "Antonetta! What happened?" His face, usually so intense, softened with concern. He moved towards her quickly, his hands gentle on her shoulders, his eyes searching hers. She couldn't speak. Not yet. The words were choked by a torrent of tears that finally broke free, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. She buried her face against his chest, clutching at his paint-stained shirt. He held her tightly, stroking her hair, murmuring soothing words against her temple. "Frank," she finally choked out, the name a bitter taste. "He knows. Everything. He's destroying me, Vronsky. My career, my money, my reputation. It's all gone. He's unleashed everything." He pulled back slightly, his expression grave. "I knew this was a risk, my love, but we'll face it, together." He kissed her forehead, then her lips, a kiss meant to reassure, to heal. "Let them talk. Let them judge. We have each other. Our truth, our love, that's what matters. We'll find a way." Antonetta nodded, clinging to his words. But as she looked around his studio, at the vibrant, untamed art, the bohemian disarray, the worn furniture, a cold, stark realization began to prickle at her. This world, his world, was untouched. It pulsed with life and passion, yes, but it was insulated from the brutal, calculating forces of Frank's Milan. His greatest worry was finding inspiration. His biggest loss, a ruined canvas. Her ruined life, by contrast, was a financial, professional, and social catastrophe. He offered solace, passion, love, and she needed it desperately. But he had no shield against the Leviathan that was Frank Ricci, no practical solution for the desolation Frank had wrought. The truth was, she had dragged him into her maelstrom, but the storm was hers alone to weather. The chasm, subtle yet profound, began to open between them, a silent acknowledgement of the vast difference in the stakes they both faced. He was a beacon of emotional warmth, but he couldn't put back the pieces of her shattered existence. Later that night, curled on Vronsky's makeshift sofa, Antonetta finally checked her phone again. The torrent of public shaming had subsided somewhat, replaced by a chilling silence. No new legal threats, no more frantic calls, just the eerie calm that follows a brutal storm. She scrolled through her contacts. Alessia, silent. Marco, silent. Many others, old friends, colleagues, acquaintances, all silent, a collective turning away. The social echo had done its work. Frank's power had done its work. The silence that descended upon Antonetta's apartment wasn't peace. It was the echoing void of everything she had lost, a chilling vacuum where her future once shimmered. Stripped bare, not just of her career and her opulent life, but of the very framework that had defined her, she stood at the precipice of an unknown abyss. The freedom she had so desperately sought had arrived, not with the triumph she envisioned, but as a crushing, isolating burden, its true weight settling with an agonizing slowness that promised to reshape her very bones. But the unraveling was far from over. This was merely the calm before a different kind of storm, one that would brew in the quiet corners of her new, diminished existence. Frank Ricci's reach, she knew, would extend far beyond the headlines, poisoning every avenue she might attempt to navigate. Antonetta had wanted to fight, but against an enemy so pervasive, so deeply entrenched, she could only brace herself. The dawn, when it finally arrived, would not bring clarity, but the stark, unforgiving reality of a battle fought not with legal papers, but with the very essence of her will, demanding sacrifices she couldn't yet imagine, all under the immense, suffocating weight of freedom. Chapter 6. The Weight of Freedom. Months after the deafening silence of her old life evaporated, Antonetta learned the true meaning of the weight of freedom. It was the stale air of this anonymous, rented apartment, a brutal antidote to the Duomo penthouse's grandeur. It was the way prospective employers' eyes, initially curious, would glaze over with a polite, practiced pity when her name was mentioned, an invisible force field deflecting every attempt she made to rebuild. Frank Ricci's reach, she discovered, was not a storm that passed, but a perpetual, chilling winter, seeping into every crack of her diminished existence. The apartment was small, a bare-bones studio on the outer fringes of the city, chosen for its anonymity and cheap rent. The walls, once a canvas for her architectural dreams, were now just blank, unforgiving surfaces. A single window looked out onto a concrete jungle, a maze of low-rise buildings that offered no comforting glimpse of the Duomo's spires, no familiar galleria. Every morning, the ritual of waking up in this sterile box was a fresh wound, a stark reminder of everything she had lost. The designer clothes, once her second skin, were folded away, replaced by practical, nondescript garments that mirrored her reduced existence. She had sold her few remaining pieces of jewelry, Frank's lawyers having frozen all her accounts. The money had dwindled quickly, not just on rent and necessities, but on the initial, desperate attempts to secure legal representation, which had proven futile against Frank's formidable legal fortress. Her days became a grueling, humiliating cycle. She would meticulously prepare, dressing in her most professional, albeit dated, attire, and embark on journeys across the city. Each interview began with a fragile hope, a flicker of her former confidence, which would inevitably be extinguished. The architecture firms, the design studios, even smaller, less prestigious practices, all offered the same choreographed rejection. Signora Moretti Ricci, an HR manager at a boutique design agency, had begun, her smile impeccably polite. Your portfolio is, of course, outstanding. Your reputation precedes you. Her eyes, however, held an almost imperceptible hardness. But, given recent events, our firm, you understand, values stability. We have long-standing relationships with certain clients, and the current climate. The words hung in the air, unspoken yet devastatingly clear. Frank had not just frozen her assets, he had poisoned her professional name. Her talent, her years of dedication, her visionary projects, all were overshadowed by the scandalous narrative he had meticulously crafted and released to the social echo. She was no longer Antonetta Moretti, the acclaimed architect. She was Antonetta Ricci, the notorious adulteress. One afternoon she even tried a small, fledgling firm in a less affluent neighborhood, hoping they would be desperate enough to overlook the gossip. The young owner, nervous but kind, had been brutally honest. "Signora, I admire your work immensely. But my biggest investor, the one keeping us afloat, he has very close ties to the Sforza Group. He made it clear, very clear, that any association with, well, your situation, would lead to immediate withdrawal of funds." His apology had been genuine, but Antonetta had felt nothing but a chilling confirmation of her utter powerlessness. Frank had built an empire of influence, and she, once a jewel in his crown, was now a pariah. The initial defiance that had spurred her in Vronsky's arms had been slowly eroded by this relentless barrage of societal disapproval and economic strangulation. The vibrant color she had glimpsed in Brera was fading under a suffocating gray. Each rejection was another brick in the wall of her isolation, a wall built by Frank but cemented by the collective judgment of Milanese society. She called Sophia once, a desperate plea for news of job openings, any connection. Sophia's voice, though full of heartbreak, was clear. "Antonetta, Frank has made sure no one will touch you here. Not for professional work, not even for consulting. He's ensured you become an example." The unspoken words hung between them, an example of what happens when you cross Frank Ricci. In her bleak apartment, surrounded by the echoes of her former life, Antonetta found herself retreating further. The emptiness that Frank had filled with opulence now gaped wider, colder. The initial exhilaration of Vronsky's love had been her only tether to something real, but even that was beginning to fray under the relentless pressure. Weeks bled into months. The vibrancy of summer yielded to the muted tones of autumn, much like Antonetta's spirit. The carefree spontaneity that had defined her early days with Vronsky had been replaced by a quiet, often strained routine. Their stolen moments now felt less like clandestine adventures, and more like necessary escapes from the crushing reality that awaited them both. They met at a secluded bench in Parco Sempione, beneath the changing leaves of a great oak, far from the laughter of children and the casual stroll of Milanese society. The air was cool, crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant city hum. Vronsky, usually a whirlwind of restless energy, sat beside her, his shoulders slumped, his gaze fixed on the tranquil water of the pond. "Antonetta," he began, his voice unusually soft, devoid of its customary passion. "We need to talk." She already knew. The silence that had grown between them spoke volumes. The intensity of their initial connection, forged in shared vulnerability and defiant passion, was being slowly, inexorably ground down by the daily struggle. Vronsky's studio, once a haven of vibrant chaos, had become a place of muted anxiety. The commissions, once steady, had thinned. The collectors who had once sought his raw, expressive pieces now hesitated, whispered, then politely declined. Frank's influence, it seemed, stretched even into the bohemian heart of Brera. "It's not just you," he confessed, turning to face her, his beautiful, intense eyes clouded with a weariness she hadn't seen before. "It's everything. My art. It feels stagnant, weighted down. I used to paint with such freedom, such abandon. Now every stroke feels like a struggle against this expectation, this burden." Antonetta felt a pang, sharp and cold. She had brought this burden to him, a storm, that had swept him up in its wake. He had offered her freedom, a glimmer of color, but in doing so, she had unwittingly imprisoned him in her own gilded cage of consequence. "I can't focus," he continued, gesturing vaguely. "The constant worry about money, about where you'll go next, about Frank's next move, it bleeds into my work, my inspiration, it's suffocating." He ran a hand through his perpetually disheveled hair, a gesture of profound frustration. "I love you, Antonetta. You know I do. You opened my eyes to so much. But this life we have now, it's not a life. It's a constant battle, and I don't know how to fight it. It's not my battle." His words, honest and raw, echoed her own dawning realization. The freedom he had offered her had been an escape from Frank's sterile luxury, but it had not been a sustainable alternative. Vronsky, the passionate artist, thrived on spontaneity, on the raw pursuit of his art. He needed an environment unburdened by the relentless pressure of societal judgment and financial insecurity. He had been her respite, her rebellion, but he could not be her architect of a new viable future. His world, so vibrant and appealing in its artistic purity, was proving utterly unequipped to stand against the organized, ruthless power of Frank Ricci. He couldn't offer the intellectual partnership, the shared ambition, or the foundational stability that, she now recognized, with a devastating clarity, she still unknowingly craved from a partner. "I understand," she said, her voice a hollow whisper, though her heart felt like a jagged shard of ice. "I know." She looked at her hands, the elegant fingers that had once commanded blueprints, now roughened from scrubbing floors in a desperate attempt to earn meager cash cleaning for strangers. "I took your freedom from you, didn't I? I brought the weight of my cage into your world." Vronsky reached for her hand, his touch tentative, almost hesitant. "No, Antonetta. You showed me a different kind of life, a different kind of love. But we live in different worlds, don't we? I paint emotions. Frank builds empires. And you were meant to build empires too, just different ones." His eyes met hers, filled with a profound sorrow. "I can't protect you from Frank. I can barely protect myself from the edges of his reach. I can't give you what you need, Antonetta, not the stability, not the foundation you deserve. I can only offer chaos and passion, and right now, that's not enough for either of us to survive." The truth settled between them, heavy and suffocating, thicker than the autumn air. Their love, born of a desperate need for authenticity, was a beautiful, tragic casualty of a war they couldn't win. It was a love that had shown her what it meant to feel alive, but it was also a love that was actively destroying them both, chipping away at Vronsky's spirit and leaving her utterly adrift. The freedom she had chased had delivered her into an even more precarious existence, a different kind of confinement. "Perhaps," Antonetta whispered, pulling her hand away gently, "perhaps our worlds were always too far apart to truly merge." She saw the pain in his eyes, mirroring her own, but also a flicker of something else. Relief. Relief that the unspoken had finally been spoken, that the burden might, at last, be acknowledged. They sat in silence for a long time, the unsaid goodbyes hanging in the crisp air. There were no tears, only a profound sense of an ending, of a dream quietly dying under the harsh light of reality. Antonetta returned to her stark apartment as dusk bled across the sky, painting the concrete landscape in shades of bruised purple and grey. The conversation with Vronsky had stripped away the last vestiges of her fragile hope. There was no escape, no alternative path where their love could thrive. The dream had imploded, leaving her utterly, irrevocably alone. On the small, scarred kitchen table, amidst a pile of unpaid bills, lay a crisp, cream-colored envelope. It was from Frank Ricci's legal team. She had been expecting it, dreading it. Her hands trembled as she opened it, the thick paper a stark contrast to her current impoverished surroundings. Inside, the terms were laid out with chilling precision. Frank, through his lawyers, was offering a final settlement. Not generous, not even fair, but enough to provide a small, anonymous existence. The conditions, however, were absolute and brutal. She was to publicly confess to the affair, not as an act of rebellion, but as a statement of profound regret and remorse, acknowledging her grievous errors, and taking full blame for the dissolution of the marriage and the damage to Frank's reputation. She was to sign a non-disclosure agreement, preventing her from ever speaking about Frank, their marriage, or the details of her affair. And most damningly, she was to agree to permanently relocate, to leave Milan, Italy, and never return, effectively disappearing from the life she once knew, and the city that had shaped her. In return, the divorce proceedings would be finalized, a meager sum deposited into an untraceable account, and Frank's campaign of professional and social annihilation would cease. The alternative was a protracted, public legal battle that would leave her utterly destitute, her name forever synonymous with shame, and a guarantee that Frank would extend his relentless wrath to Vronsky, ensuring his artistic career and life in Milan were systematically destroyed. Antonetta stared at the document, the cold legal jargon blurring before her eyes. The weight of freedom. This was it. This was the tragic choice. Surrender completely, humiliate herself publicly, vanish, but gain a sliver of anonymity, and protect Vronsky from Frank's vengeful reach. Or fight, ensure Vronsky's ruin, and condemn herself to utter destitution and eternal public ignominy. The choice, when it finally came, was not one of defiance, but of profound, agonizing sacrifice. She had wanted to be seen, to be free, to feel alive. She had found it, however briefly, in Vronsky's arms. But that freedom had carved a canyon of destruction, and she was now at its edge, staring into the abyss. Her mind went to Vronsky, his face etched with weariness, his art suffocated. She could not bear to be the reason for his complete ruin. She had taken enough from him. The raw, beautiful spirit she had so admired. She would not allow Frank to crush it. For a fleeting moment, she considered what Sophia had said. Frank's power. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about damage control, about salvaging a fraction of dignity, and making sure the fallout didn't destroy someone else she cared for. The ink on the page dried, a stark, indelible mark against her name, binding her not to freedom, but to an absolute, chilling severance. Antonetta Ricci, reduced to a ghost, felt the grand opera of her Milanese life recede into a distant hum. The golden cage had shattered, yes, but only to reveal a deeper, colder prison forged from despair and the immense, irreparable loss of everything she had once been. Her hand, steady moments ago, now trembled, not with regret, but with the profound, devastating knowledge that she had just erased herself from the world she knew. The echoes of Milan would continue, of course, but she would be gone. A phantom whisper, a name invoked in hushed tones, if at all. What kind of freedom could be found in such an erasure, she wondered, as the autumn dusk swallowed the last vestiges of the city's light. An unknown, silent future awaited, not a liberation perhaps, but a stark reckoning. For the weight of her choice, the price of escaping her gilded past, would define not just her absence, but the woman she was yet to become, etched forever by the very act that severed her from her old life. And in the months that bled into a year, the city she fled would indeed remember her, not for the woman she was, but for the profound, tragic echo of the choice she had made. Chapter 7. Echoes of a Choice. The autumn leaves had turned and fallen twice since the ink on the page dried, solidifying Antonetta's stark erasure from a world that had once been hers. She was no longer a ghost haunting the opulent Duomo, but a quiet presence in a less fashionable corner of Milan, where the scent of baking bread and diesel fumes replaced expensive perfume. Mornings now began not with a tailored silk robe, but with the practical rustle of a modest uniform, her hands, once adorned with diamonds, now efficiently preparing coffee in a stark, communal kitchen. A year had etched itself onto her features, deepening the shadows beneath her eyes, but also lending them a clarity that spoke of profound understanding rather than despair. The grand opera of Milanese society continued, its familiar melody a distant, almost forgotten hum. Yet in the quiet rhythm of her new life, in the anonymity she had purchased at so great a cost, the echoes of her choice resonated, not as a lament, but as the steady, melancholic pulse of a new, stark freedom. Her current world was confined to the unassuming geometry of a small, independent bookstore and cafe, tucked away on a cobblestone side street near the Navigli district. It was a far cry from the sleek glass and steel towers of Moretti architects, or the gilded grandeur of the Duomo penthouse. Here the air smelled of old paper, ground coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of warm pastries, a comforting, unpretentious aroma. She moved with a quiet efficiency, wiping down tables, stocking shelves with novels whose characters navigated their own intricate mazes of love and loss, and preparing simple espressos and cappuccinos. Her uniform was a plain charcoal apron over an equally plain shirt and trousers, her dark hair pulled back in a practical, unadorned knot. The movements were simple, almost meditative. There was no need for the carefully calibrated bella figura she once maintained, no scrutinizing gazes, no whispers of judgment from an unforgiving society. Here she was merely Antonetta, the quiet woman who made good coffee and knew where to find an obscure edition of Calvino. Her customers were locals, students, elderly regulars, a few artists from the fringes of the bohemian scene, none of whom recognized the architect who had once graced the covers of design magazines. They saw only the woman before them, with eyes that held an unexpected depth, a stillness that hinted at vast unseen landscapes within. Her once flawless complexion was a little paler, lines of worry etched faintly around her lips, but a subtle strength had settled into her posture, a quiet dignity that had replaced her former regal bearing. The superficial polish had faded, revealing the raw, enduring woman beneath. She had learned to live on less, to appreciate the warmth of a simple blanket, the taste of a home-cooked meal, the comfort of silence. Her apartment, a single room with a small kitchenette and a bathroom, was sparsely furnished, but meticulously clean. No designer furniture, no priceless art, just books, a small plant on the windowsill, and a framed photograph of her parents, taken years ago, before she became Antonetta Ricci, a name that felt like a stranger's now. She had traded a golden cage for a humble, open window. There were still moments, especially when the Milanese sun caught a certain angle of light, that she felt a phantom ache, a ghost limb of her old life, but these passed. What remained was the quiet hum of her own breath, the steady beat of her own heart, and the unwavering truth that she was, finally, truly, herself. One brisk afternoon, while sorting through a delivery of Italian newspapers, a small, archived article caught her eye. It was a digital clipping from a society column, dated nearly a year ago, buried deep within a lifestyle blog Antonetta knew was connected to Alessia Visconti. The headline was innocuous enough. Frank Ricci's Sforza Group continues global expansion, with new Milanese philanthropic initiative. But buried in the third paragraph, a subtle, almost throwaway line referred to the, quote, challenges Mr. Ricci stoically overcame last year, including certain regrettable personal choices by those once close to him, which ultimately strengthened his resolve and focus on community. No names were mentioned, of course. None were needed. Antonetta felt a cold, familiar ripple of recognition. She scanned the associated comments, a digital chorus of self-righteous indignation. Some women just don't know when they're lucky, one read. A true gentleman, Mr. Ricci, another declared. Karma always comes calling, a third opined, heavy with implied meaning. Her story, she realized, had not faded into obscurity. It had solidified, transformed from gossip into legend, a modern cautionary tale whispered in the hallowed halls of Milanese society. She was the woman who had dared to defy Frank Ricci, the archetype of passion-fueled despair, invoked as a grim warning to any who might consider straying from the prescribed path. Frank, the wronged husband, had not only restored his reputation, but enhanced it. leveraging her fall to portray himself as a titan of stoic resilience and unwavering commitment to Milan. She pictured him, perhaps with a new, impeccably composed woman by his side, gliding through another gala, his practiced smile never quite reaching his calculating eyes. The social echo was merely a mirror of his enduring power, reflecting his carefully constructed narrative back to the world. A notification pinged on her old, unassuming phone. A message from Sophia. "Antonetta, thinking of you. I saw that awful piece Alessia put out again, recycled of course. Don't let it get to you. You made your choice and you're still standing. More than can be said for some. Come by for coffee if you ever feel up to it. Just you, no judgment. XO." Antonetta smiled faintly. A genuine, if melancholic, smile. Sophia's loyalty, quiet and steadfast, was one of the few threads connecting her to a life she no longer lived. She didn't reply immediately, but the message and the article solidified her understanding. The old world still existed, still judged, but it no longer held her captive. Its echoes were distant, unable to penetrate the quietude she had built. Later that week, while tidying the small cultural events board near the cafe's entrance, Antonetta saw a flyer. It was for a new exhibition in the Brera district. VK Palimpsest of Light. The title itself, evoking layers of erased and rewritten history, resonated deeply. She remembered his intense gaze, the raw honesty of his art. She felt a quiet, almost dispassionate curiosity. She didn't go to the exhibition. She didn't need to. She knew, without seeing it, that his art would have changed. The vibrant, unbridled passion she had witnessed in his early works would now be infused with a new depth, a more somber, perhaps melancholic understanding of the human heart. The chaotic brilliance, the defiant lines, would likely be tempered by a subtle gravity, a quiet sorrow that spoke of experience. She imagined his studio, perhaps a little tidier now, or perhaps still gloriously chaotic, but with a different kind of intensity. He would have processed their shared, tragic interlude, integrating it into his artistic language. He would have moved on, as they both had, carrying the imprints of their connection not as a burden, but as a foundational layer upon which new visions were built. There would be respect, she knew, and a lingering sadness for what could not be. But he was an artist, forever driven to express, to create, to find meaning even in the fragments of ruin. He had shown her a glimmer of color, and that color, though it had led her to despair, had also led him to a deeper understanding of the human condition, enriching his work in ways he perhaps could not have foreseen. He was free, as she was in their own ways. The day was drawing to a close as Antonetta finished her shift. She walked through the familiar streets of her new neighborhood, past old women chatting on balconies and children playing in small courtyards. Instead of heading straight home, she turned onto a less traveled alley, emerging into a small, forgotten piazza. It wasn't grand like the Piazza del Duomo, or bustling like San Babila. It was just a quiet square, bordered by old, faded buildings, with a single cracked fountain at its center, and a few weathered benches under the shade of plane trees. She chose a bench near the edge, settling down to watch the distant Milanese skyline blur into shades of rose and violet as the sun dipped lower. The spire of the Duomo, a distant glittering needle, pierced the evening sky. It was a symbol, an echo of a life that felt impossibly far away. She closed her eyes, letting the sounds of the city wash over her. The rumble of a distant tram, the laughter of children, the faint peal of church bells. She thought of her journey, the suffocating perfection of her golden cage, the quiet ache that had gnawed at her soul, the electrifying encounter that had shattered her carefully constructed world. She remembered the reckless abandon of her passion with Vronsky, the feeling of finally being seen, truly alive. And then, the unraveling. Frank's cold, calculated destruction, society's venomous chorus, the stark reality of losing everything she had once valued, the weight of freedom, heavier than any chain, as she traded a gilded prison for a desolate, exposed plain. She had stood at a precipice, forced to choose between her own annihilation and the quiet, crushing sacrifice that would save the man who had shown her color. She had chosen, and now, here she was. Stripped bare, devoid of the opulent trappings, the prestige, the very identity that had defined her. Yet, in this stark clarity, there was something profound. She opened her eyes, gazing at the distant Duomo, then tracing the contours of the city that lay between her and its golden spire. The Milan that had once been her stage, her prison, her battleground. It was still there, vibrant and unforgiving, but she was no longer a player in its relentless drama. She was an observer, a quiet witness to the ebb and flow of a world from which she had voluntarily receded. There was no triumph in this stillness, no joyful emancipation. Her freedom was melancholic, tinged with the irreparable loss of so much. The love she had found, the career she had cherished, the very future she had envisioned, all had been sacrificed. But in the ashes of that sacrifice, she had found something unwavering: authenticity. She was no longer living a lie, no longer striving for a bella figura that concealed a hollow core. She was simply Antonetta, a woman profoundly changed, marked by passion and despair, who had dared to seek meaning in a world that prioritized appearance. She had paid the devastating price for her choice, and the echoes of it would forever resonate within her. But in this quiet piazza, under the vast, indifferent sky, she found a strange, deep peace. It was the peace of self-knowledge, of having seen the abyss and walked through it, emerging not whole but real. She had sought to feel truly alive, and in the tragic unfolding of her life, she had. She finally understood the full, profound, and often heartbreaking cost of true freedom. And in that understanding, she found her quiet, enduring truth.
Thank you for listening to this Soundscape Books recording. We hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe so you don't miss our new releases. Goodbye for now.